Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome back Francisco Torres, interventional physiatrist, and a fourth-year medical student, Purab Patel. Their Kevin MD article is Navigating the Cybersecurity Challenges of Artificial Intelligence in Medicine. Francisco and Purab, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ken, for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Perfect. So, Francisco, thank you again for joining me. It's great seeing you again. Tell
Thanks.
us how this article between you and Purab came together.
Well, this is fascinating. I have been always interested in new technology, and AI for me for the last year, year and a half, has blown my mind away. And I got lucky that Purab, his background is a programmer and a very good one. And so we start talking about the benefits of AI. As a matter of fact, we wrote another essay about because I always thought that I needed to know the size of the neural foramina when I was doing epidurals and things like that. But that information was not being told to us from the radiologist because it was easy for them to say moderate, severe. So I said, look, if we do the AI, they can measure that, and the radiologist doesn't have to waste time doing that. So that conversation started. But then he told me, hey, I'm very concerned about cybersecurity. Now we're putting the patient data out there, not just because of their name or social security number, but also because medical issues that they can cause death if it's done not correctly. So that's the way we came out with the article.
All right. And Prav, you're a medical student. Of course, you have a background as a programmer, certainly interested in hearing your perspective. For those of you who get a chance to read your article, just tell us briefly what it's about.
Yeah, so the main gap that we were identifying is the lack of awareness around security issues with AI amongst healthcare professionals. And the fact that these AI pipelines are so complex, there's so many steps to the training of the models, the implementation, the actual use. And each of those points is a point of vulnerability where cybersecurity attacks can occur and where malicious players can take advantage. So we wanted to identify some of those issues and really open the lights of providers to those issues.
And Prav, when you say AI, are we just talking about publicly available models like ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude? Are we talking about models specifically geared towards physicians like Doximity and Open Evidence? So when we say just AI models, just give us a sense of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so we're talking about both. The more publicly available models are still in use by many physicians in independent practice. And of course, hospital systems have their own proprietary models, and both have similar but also different vulnerabilities. So we are considering both in this essay.
So tell us more, Prabha, about some of the vulnerabilities to a non-programmer. A lot of this audience are non-programmers. So what do we need to be concerned about?
Yeah, so several vulnerabilities. One is in the very beginning where you're training the models with patient data, making sure that the confidentiality of the patient is respected. That's one of the key principles that is taught in medical training. But when we train these models, we are submitting information to them, and there are ways for malicious actors to extract that information from the models through various prompts. So making sure that we de-identify the patient sufficiently that that information can't be recovered. Other issues are at the time of actual use of the model. So, for example, with image analysis in radiology, there's a big issue around adversarial attacks where somebody can change a few pixels inside an image and the model will come up with the wrong diagnosis. And that obviously has downstream implications for management. So, that was another issue that we considered. And then one more was the fact that these models are so fragmented sometimes in the way that the pipeline is implemented. The model may be trained in one country, may be implemented in another country. And so the data is spread across multiple different regulatory landscapes, and the laws may be different in each of those locations. So that's something else that we considered.
And to be clear, the publicly available models like the GPT, Gemini, and Claude, they are certainly not HIPAA compliant. Is that right, Prab?
Yes, they are not.
So,
And I
Francisco,
think
when you heard this, tell us what your thoughts were when Prab told you about some of these cybersecurity concerns for these AI models.
so I was in shock because you mentioned HIPAA compliance, but it's not the same with AI. It goes further because right now we're putting patients' life at risk because the hacker can modify a pixel, like he said, and change completely the algorithm about what. He was just telling me that there is a hospital where the intensive care unit is run by the AI.
Yes, there was a recent news article about a hospital in the northeast of the US where somebody died. And part of that investigation was the fact that the ICU was using AI tools to kind of automate certain monitoring of ventilators and things like that. And so that was just one news article that came up lately.
Hmm. Now, in terms of potential safeguards before physicians use any AI models, Parab, what do you recommend? What kind of questions do we need to be asking ourselves whenever physicians use these AI models? Because I know that we have some basic knowledge that we're taught just never to give patient information to publicly AI models because whatever we type in is being used to train on. But that's very cursory and rudimentary. So tell us the type of things that we need to think about before we use these AI models for the first time.
Yeah, so I think first off is just understanding what the purpose behind the model was and why it was created. Was it created specifically for a healthcare purpose application, or was it created for a generic application and then adapted to healthcare? So that definitely plays a difference in the security considerations that went into the design of the model and whether it was built for the healthcare environment. Secondly, I think it's important to consider where the data is stored and where the data is processed. It's sometimes this concept of a black box where you just put in the patient information and get an answer back. But what are the steps? What's the chain that the information is actually traveling down? What's the infrastructure that this company has in place? Maybe the company that provides a model may be reliable, but they may have other vendors in the mix that are not as reliable or have had more significant issues. So understanding the complete chain is, I think, important. And lastly, at the point of use, making sure that you always double check everything, not completely and blindly trusting the AI, making sure that that trust is earned over time instead of automatically assumed.
And another thing I want to interject is like in the past, Kevin, doctors that they went in through their life as a doctor, they wanted to get an MBA to be directors or whatever. I think now that's changing. I think it's more important. I even tell my kids that you need to get certified and train in AI because it applies to everything we do in life right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that probably they're going to be courses geared towards doctors, clinicians, to know how to identify those areas that are vulnerable.
Now, Francisco, you use AI just within the last year or so, and fantastic in terms of how powerful it is. But after hearing some of these concerns that Parab has surfaced and you guys talked about, has that changed your outlook? Has that changed how you're using these AI models?
You know what it has done for me to be more educated and be more careful. But I do love the technology. I think, again, going back to what we talk about the radiology, there was also a big study done where the AI read X-rays already read by radiology identified like 40% or 50% of vertebral fractures. So I think it brings a lot of good, but we need to be careful. We need to rely on very good tools that I hope the government too gets involved heavily. And I don't know with you, Kevin, but when we buy a EMR system, I don't go into the detail. How do they get trained? I just I don't really get into that, but I don't think we can do the same thing with AI right now. We cannot assume that everything is the vendors are doing their job. I don't think we can assume that anymore.
Now, Francisco, you have an interventional physiatry practice. Just give us some examples of how AI has changed your practice in the last few months.
Well, we don't actually have a system right now, but I just see it around the hospitals right now. Like, for example, the return when we get the MRI report, you can tell there had been some AI type of intelligence behind it, and the radiology is just confirming right now. And I think eventually that two specialties that are going to suffer probably going to be radiology and pathology because it's just pattern recognition. So as long as you have somebody supervising them, I just think that it just expedite reports, expedite care in the hospital. I have seen it that even medication are delivered through AI and things like that. So I think that it's positive in that way.
So I'm reading a lot in the news that a lot of these AI companies, it's a race, almost like an arms race in terms of who can produce the biggest, fastest, most powerful model.
Yeah,
And they want to be first to ship, right?
yeah.
Before all the consequences. But in healthcare, there's a lot of consequences if we ship too quickly in healthcare. Now, in that context, how can physicians be careful? Because there are going to be a lot of vendors who are pitching these AI solutions to them, and hospitals, they're navigating how they can best use AI, and then they're going to respond to demands from their physicians to better use AI. How can we proceed more cautiously in this new world when everything is literally changing on a weekly basis?
Yeah, it's difficult. And I think part of that difficulty is the fact that medical training takes so long. And so there's a lag period. Somebody that enters, for example, radiology residency today, is not going to graduate until 5 years from now. And the world is going to be different, especially with the innovations in AI. So I think one of the key steps is doing your research before you start using a tool, making sure that you know who developed this model, what the overall reputation of the company is, has it been tested in other domains before it's brought into the hospital. And also, there's obviously going to be a certain period of time where there's coexistence of humans doing a certain task and AI doing a certain task, where you can kind of monitor the progress, the accuracy, until you finally get confident enough that you allow the AI to be more autonomous. So I think it has to be a gradual transition in that sense.
Now, a lot of physicians still aren't using AI at all. They're not in our world. And I'm sure you, as a former programmer, and a lot of your other medical student colleagues, they're using AI on a daily basis. Just from your perspective as a programmer with a background in your perspective with a background in programming, just give us some clear do's and don'ts when it comes to physicians using these AI models for the first time.
Yeah, so I think one of the first don'ts is blindly trusting outputs. It's been well established that AI can miss things, and the rate at which it misses certain findings or certain pieces of text is not proportional to the clinical significance of that. So there's been reports that in automatic note-taking software, for example, sometimes very important points might be missed. So I think making sure that we are aware of that is definitely important. And secondly, I think is from a programming standpoint, the pipelines, how these models are trained, are very complicated. But the basics to understand is that it's essentially a large collection of data, and it's an average of that data that the AI is using. So rare diseases, rare cases that are not represented in that training data, or patient populations that are not represented in training data, those are areas where you don't want to trust the outputs as much. So I think that's an important consideration.
And one thing, Kevin, that I propose that, in Florida, every time we have to renew our medical license, we have to take courses of medical errors, of domestic violence. I think we just need to advocate to have that as part of our requirement to renew our license, some basic courses that at least we can identify potential problems.
So, Francisco, other than talking to Purab about the potential of AI, did you get any exposure through CMEs and through your colleagues in terms of how AI is being intersected with what other physicians are typically doing? How are you learning about the medical applications of AI?
Well, I have to say, I have taken some of those courses that they advertise, but not related to medicine. This is more the regular AI. But I can probably extrapolate from there. Like, for example, I go to my setting. That's what I learned from with my nephew, is that you want to protect your privacy. So if you tell your AI not to train with your data, that's something that you can do it on purpose, but it's not going to be a default. And I think that is, little by little, getting educated as I use it just for my personal business. I think eventually it will be better to know, like that, for example, again, going to radiology and having a report generated by the AI. I want to know if a radiologist supervised that AI or it was without supervision, like that case that you mentioned that there were no supervision. So I think those little things, eventually we're going to have to figure this out as we go, learn as we go.
We're talking to Francisco Torres, an interventional physiatrist, and Purab Patel, a medical student. Today's Kevin MD article is Navigating the Cybersecurity Challenges of Artificial Intelligence in Medicine. Now I'm just going to ask each of you just to share some take-home messages with the Kevin MD audience. Francisco, why don't we start with you, and then we'll end with Purab.
I would just start saying that AI is a tool and it's not a truth machine. Cybersecurity is now a patient safety issue, and we need to be concerned. And we need to start asking our vendors tough questions, not be complacent. And also be skeptical of any black box that said, oh, that's the way it works. And also, I think I don't like regulations so much, but I think in this particular case, we're going to depend on some government regulation like they do with medical devices and medications, which it's going to have to happen.
And Purab, we'll end with you. Yep, your take-home messages.
I agree with a lot of those points. I think AI is definitely a powerful tool and one that will transform the practice of medicine, but one that we also have to be skeptical about, critical about, and make sure that we don't take at face value without actually analyzing its benefits and its risks.
Francisco and Purab, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and insight. Thanks again for both of you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.